The unexpected challenge. Marcus sat in the corner of the bustling cantina, a quiet oasis amid the cacophony of a busy spaceport on the edge of the galaxy. The dim lighting cast long shadows, making the space feel both intimate and otherworldly. His boots were kicked up on the edge of the table, and his posture was relaxed, almost lazily so, as if he were simply enjoying a moment of solitude in the chaos that surrounded him. The hum of various species conversing, alien languages mixing with the occasional clink of glasses, created a soundtrack of sorts to the evening. In the corner, a few patrons were engaged in a heated debate about galactic politics, while a group of off-world traders exchanged stories of their latest adventures. For Marcus, it was just another day in this strange corner of the universe. He was a human in a galaxy full of species that regarded his kind as little more than a curiosity, primitive, unrefined, and not much of a threat. But Marcus knew better. He had spent years traveling from one star system to the next, encountering all manner of beings, each more alien and fascinating than the last. Humanity, despite their relative youth in the grand scheme of the galaxy, had proven time and time again that they could hold their own, adapt, and survive. Tonight, however, was shaping up to be different. He took another sip of his synthesized whiskey, the taste far from the smooth burn of true earth whiskey, but it was close enough. The drink didn't quite hit the spot, but it would do. What was more important to Marcus was the quiet hum in the air that something was about to change. The spaceport was full of life, but there was something else in the atmosphere. A tension, an undercurrent that he couldn't quite place. Suddenly, a shadow fell across his table. Marcus didn't look up right away, not immediately acknowledging the presence of the newcomer. He could feel the weight of the figure standing there, its size and sheer presence filling the space. The other patrons, who had been laughing and chattering just moments ago, fell into an uneasy silence. Even the music from the jukebox seemed to pause, as if the cantina itself was holding its breath. When Marcus finally lifted his gaze, his eyes met the figure standing in front of him. The Kron warrior was tall, easily 9 feet, and built like a tank, with 4 muscular arms that rippled with power beneath the intricately designed armor that covered most of its body. Its head was crowned with a set of mandibles, a feature that was as intimidating as it was alien. Crystalline violet eyes glowed from beneath its helmet, narrowing as they locked onto Marcus. The warrior's posture was rigid, proud, and imposing, the kind that sent a clear message: I am not someone to be trifled with. Marcus raised an eyebrow, sensing exactly what kind of trouble he was in. His lips curled into a wry smile, but his eyes remained cool and steady. The Kron warrior wasn't here to chat or trade stories. It was here for a reason. Marcus could tell. "You're the human," the warrior said, its voice rough and guttural, like the sound of grinding stone. The words were heavy with condescension, as though Marcus were some strange curiosity to be poked and prodded. "Marcus, I believe." Marcus took another slow sip from his glass, leaning back slightly in his chair. "That's me," he replied nonchalantly, not showing any hint of concern. The warrior's reputation preceded it. Zex Thor, the undefeated first blade of the Kron Empire. Legendary across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy, Zex Thor had never lost a duel. The Kron were known for their brutal efficiency in combat, with a fighting style that incorporated all 4 of their arms in a deadly dance of strikes. And yet, despite the weight of the reputation, and the fearsome reputation that surrounded him, Marcus remained unfazed. Humans had faced worse, and they had survived. "You challenge me to a duel." Zex Thor's mandibles clicked together in a harsh, mocking laugh that reverberated through the room. The alien's tone was dripping with disdain. "You, a mere human, think you can match my skill? Do you even know who I am?" Marcus smiled. The warrior's arrogance was palpable, the assumption that Marcus was just some soft, fragile creature who had no place in such a challenge. The idea that a human would even consider stepping into the arena with a warrior of Zex Thor's caliber was laughable to most of the other aliens in the room. Several of them were already eyeing one another, making bets on how long the human would last against the Kron legend. "Yeah, I know who you are, Zex Thor," Marcus said, casually finishing off his drink. "You're the undefeated champion, the warrior who's never lost. You've carved your name into the stars, slaughtered countless opponents in single combat. Impressive, sure. But I'm not really here for your story. I'm here because you decided to pick the wrong fight." The warrior's violet eyes narrowed, the ridges on its jaw tightening as a low growl rumbled in its throat. "You speak as though you have a chance," Zex Thor sneered. "When I defeat you, I'll mount your head in my trophy room, like all the others who dared challenge me." Marcus met his gaze with an impassive expression, taking in every detail, the arrogant posture, the way Zex Thor flexed its four arms in preparation for battle. This was a display of dominance, a way of intimidating him. But Marcus wasn't impressed. "Neat," Marcus said, standing up slowly and stretching his arms, completely at ease. "You'll have to update your trophy room then." Zex Thor's mandibles clicked again, more violently this time, a gesture that indicated the warrior's barely contained rage. The creature's posture shifted, readying itself for combat. Its eyes glinted with an almost predatory gleam, a promise that once this human was nothing more than a stain on the floor, Zex Thor would relish every moment of it. "Traditional rules of engagement, of course," Marcus added, holding up his hand, as though the very idea of combat etiquette had crossed his mind. "I doubt you know them, but here we go anyway. First blood or yield. No energy weapons, no projectiles. Blade-to-blade combat only. And let's see, starting distance of 10 paces, neutral ground, and witnesses present." He checked his watch for good measure. Sound about right. The crowd fell into a hushed murmur at Marcus's calmness. The human knew the rules of dueling, ancient rules that very few had ever bothered to memorize. Even some of the most experienced fighters from across the galaxy were now eyeing Marcus with a sense of admiration mixed with disbelief. For a human to understand and respect their ancient customs, well, that was a first. Zex Thor's mandibles clicked in rapid succession, and the warrior's shoulders squared as it clenched its fists. "You are indeed bold, human," Zex Thor growled. "You will regret this." The duel was set. The countdown began, and Marcus calmly walked towards the exit of the cantina. But as he reached the door, he turned around one last time, fixing Zex Thor with a knowing look. "By the way, Zex, you might want to update your will first." The cantina erupted in shocked gasps, nervous laughter, and a few audible gasps of disbelief. The warriors and patrons alike watched as Marcus stepped out of the cantina, ready for whatever awaited him in the Plaza of Champions. 1 hour later, the Plaza of Champions stood ready. The arena was packed. Word had spread quickly, and soon, people from all walks of life had gathered to witness the spectacle. Marcus had arrived exactly on time, wearing his worn leather boots and a simple black t-shirt, carrying only a plain steel sword at his side. Zex Thor, on the other hand, was fully armored in ceremonial combat regalia. His blade, a masterwork of Kron metallurgy, gleamed menacingly in the artificial lights. He was prepared for what he expected to be the death of this human. But what Zex Thor didn't realize was that this human was different, and this fight was about to turn the entire galaxy on its head. The duel was about to begin. The duel begins. The Plaza of Champions was alive with energy, the thick air vibrating with the hum of anticipation as the spectators took their places around the circular arena. The space was vast, 50 meters in diameter, surrounded by towering columns and screens projecting the live feeds for those too far away to see the action up close. It was the kind of place where legends were made. And tonight, all eyes were on one of the most unlikely duels in the history of the galaxy. Marcus stood at the edge of the arena, his hands loose at his sides, casually eyeing the crowd. The alien faces were a blur of excitement and disbelief, their alien features reflecting a mix of confusion, amusement, and pity. After all, what were the odds that a human, a race barely a century into space travel, would even survive a duel with the legendary Zex Thor, the undefeated Kron warrior. Marcus didn't care about the odds. He wasn't here for their pity, and he sure as hell wasn't here to lose. He was here to make a point. It wasn't arrogance. It was a truth that most people in the galaxy hadn't realized yet. Humans were survivors. That's what set them apart. And that's why they were dangerous. He adjusted his grip on his simple steel sword, a far cry from the dazzling monomolecular blades of his opponent. The sword was modest, just plain steel, wrapped in leather for a better grip. But it was enough. The human had spent years training, not with alien technology or impossible techniques, but with simple, effective Earth methods. His years of kendo, his time spent sparring with anyone who'd challenge him, had all led to this moment. He didn't need alien tech. He just needed to fight smarter. Zex Thor stood across from him, a towering figure in gleaming ceremonial armor. The Kron warrior's 4 arms flexed with anticipation, and his eyes, those glowing crystalline eyes, narrowed with focused fury. His blade, a work of art designed to slice through anything in its path, was raised and ready. The crowd held their breath. This was it. The official, a lanky Vec with an expression of mild discomfort, stepped forward, raising his staff high. His voice echoed through the plaza, filled with the reverence of the ancient dueling traditions. "May honor guide your blades," he said, before stepping back. His job was simple. Ensure that the duel went according to the age-old rules. First blood or yield. No tricks. No weapons other than blades. No energy pulses. No gadgets. Just raw skill. The signal was given. In an instant, Zex Thor lunged forward, a blur of speed and power. His ceremonial blade cleaved through the air with precision, the sharp hum of its motion like a deadly song. The crowd collectively gasped as the Kron warrior's arms moved in perfect synchronization, each strike aimed at a different target. He was a master of the 7 forms of Kron combat, a style honed over centuries of warfare. Every movement was calculated, designed to end his opponent swiftly. But Marcus wasn't there. With a casual sidestep, he avoided the first slash entirely. Zex Thor's blade screamed past him, inches from his skin, but Marcus was already 1 step ahead, already anticipating the next move. His eyes never left his opponent, never showing even the faintest hint of fear. The crowd watched in stunned silence. This wasn't supposed to happen. Zex Thor's reputation as the undefeated champion was one of the most legendary in the galaxy, and yet here was a human, weaving through his strikes like he was reading a book, and all while maintaining an air of disinterest, as if this were just another day for him. Zex Thor didn't hesitate. He immediately spun on his heel, launching a series of rapid strikes, each one flowing seamlessly from the other. His 4 arms worked in perfect harmony, a deadly dance that no one in the arena could match. But again, Marcus wasn't there. Each strike passed through empty air, a phantom dodge executed with the precision of someone who had practiced the art of evasion his entire life. His body moved fluidly, avoiding the blades with minimal effort, each step calculated and precise. The human was making a mockery of Zex Thor's perfected technique. The legendary Kron warrior's strikes, once deadly and fluid, were starting to show cracks in their execution. His steps faltered, his footwork slipping as he overcommitted on every follow-through. Marcus had already predicted this. "You're overcommitting, Zex," Marcus said, his voice calm but sharp. "You're making yourself predictable." The warrior let out an enraged roar, his mandibles grinding as he pushed forward with renewed intensity. His movements were faster now, more frenzied, as though he were trying to brute force his way through Marcus's defenses. The human wasn't supposed to be this good. He wasn't supposed to be dodging every strike without even raising his sword. He wasn't supposed to be making the mighty Zex Thor look like a novice. But Marcus didn't move in response. He simply watched, taking in the Kron warrior's style with the analytical eye of someone who had fought for survival on his own deathworld for his entire life. Humans didn't have the luxury of perfection. They didn't have the time to make their movements flawless. They had to survive, and in order to do that, they had to adapt. It was a mindset that Zex Thor could never understand. The Kran's pride in his centuries of tradition blinded him to the fact that perfection could be a weakness, stagnation in the face of evolving tactics. You might want to watch your left side. Marcus continued, sidestepping another flurry of strikes. You're leaving it wide open. Zex Thor's growl was guttural, his frustration now boiling over. He had never been humiliated like this before. His every movement had been meticulously crafted over centuries. Yet here he was, unable to land a single blow on this human who didn't even seem to be trying. His breathing became heavy, the anger and desperation flooding his veins as he pushed himself further, each failed strike only making him angrier, more reckless. You talk too much, human. Zex Thor spat, his voice vibrating with rage. He spun again, launching himself at Marcus with a series of strikes that came at him from all angles. The warrior's arms were a blur of deadly intent, faster than anything the human had seen so far. It was a last-ditch effort, a move born of frustration and pride. But Marcus was already in motion. In one smooth motion, Marcus shifted his body with the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime mastering the art of timing and technique. He ducked under one swing, stepped to the side to avoid another, and in a flash, the human's sword was raised. The crowd gasped as the Kran warrior's blade went sailing through the air, losing its grip as it was disarmed in a single fluid movement. Zex Thor stood frozen, his forearms raised in shock. For the first time in centuries, he found himself unarmed, his blade now embedded in the plaza floor 30 meters away. A thin line of phosphorescent blue blood welled up from a shallow cut across his wrist, the first blood drawn in this duel. The official's voice rang out across the plaza, his tone the mixture of disbelief and awe. First blood. The duel is concluded. The human, Marcus, is declared the victor. The arena fell into absolute silence. The sound of the wind through the synthetic trees, the distant hum of the spaceport beyond, all faded as the realization sank in. Zex Thor, the undefeated Kran warrior, had been bested by a human. The crowd, once full of jeers and laughter at Marcus's expense, now stood frozen, unsure of what to make of what they had just witnessed. Marcus sheathed his sword, his face a mask of calm indifference. He walked up to the stunned Zex Thor, who was still staring at his empty hands in disbelief. The warrior's mandibles clicked silently, unable to process what had just happened. "Good match," Marcus said, his tone casual, as if they had just sparred in a friendly competition rather than a life-or-death duel. "You've got some serious skill. Just needs a bit of refinement." Zex Thor's voice barely rose above a whisper. How did you? What form was that?" Marcus shrugged nonchalantly. "Oh, this wasn't any fancy alien combat style. Just good old-fashioned human kendo and a bit of hammer work. About 15 years of practice, plus some cross-training in other earth martial arts." The crowd still hadn't recovered, but Marcus was already walking away, his mind already turning toward the next challenge. What had just happened wasn't just a victory for one human. It was a victory for an entire species, a message that was about to echo across the galaxy. And Zex Thor, the undefeated, would forever remember the day when a human taught him what it meant to underestimate someone. The Kran warrior's reckoning. The Plaza of Champions was still eerily silent as Marcus walked away from the disarmed Zex Thor. The Kran warrior stood motionless in the center of the arena, his mandibles clicking in a confused, almost dazed rhythm. His forearms hung limp at his sides, no longer the tools of destruction they had been moments before, now seemingly useless. The legend of Zex Thor, who had crushed countless warriors in single combat, had been shattered by a human, a species the rest of the galaxy regarded as primitive. The sheer weight of the moment was beginning to sink in for Zex Thor. As Marcus walked back toward the edge of the arena, the tension in the air finally broke. Whispers erupted from the crowd. a mix of disbelief, admiration, and confusion. Several of the spectators, who had initially laughed at the humans' audacity, were now muttering about the impossible odds they had just witnessed. Bets had been placed with a 1.3 million to 1 odds in favor of Zex Thor. And now, those who had backed Marcus were collecting their winnings with smug grins. But even as the crowd's chatter swelled around him, Marcus's mind was already focused on what came next. He was in this for more than just the fight. This was about proving that humanity was more than just a footnote in the galaxy's history. A species that had survived on a death world, fought its way out of adversity, and now stood on the brink of taking its rightful place among the stars. This was only the beginning. As he reached the edge of the arena, Marcus turned and glanced back. Zex Thor was still standing motionless in the center of the ring, but now there was something new in his posture, something that hadn't been there before. Humility. "You?" Zex Thor's voice was low, barely audible over the din of the crowd. "You defeated me." The Kron warrior's words hung in the air like a physical weight. It wasn't an admission of defeat, not yet, but it was a crack in the armor of his pride. "I have never lost before." Marcus raised an eyebrow, his face softening slightly. "Yeah, I noticed. You're good, Zex. Real good. Just not good enough, though." Zex Thor's mandibles clicked together, his body tensing as though preparing for something more, something even worse. But Marcus wasn't looking for a fight anymore. The battle was over. The lesson had been delivered. "I don't know what you were expecting," Marcus continued, his voice cool. "But let me tell you something, Zex. The galaxy looks at humans like we're some weak, barely evolved species. You saw that yourself, didn't you? They're all betting on your victory like it's a foregone conclusion. They expect us to fail. But what they don't realize is that we've been living on a death world for centuries. We've been fighting, killing, surviving, evolving, all on a planet where everything's trying to kill us." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in. Zex Thor looked up at him, confusion, and perhaps even a flicker of understanding in his eyes. The warrior's breath slowed, and he took a step forward, the first real movement since his defeat. "Humans have fought for survival every second of our existence," Marcus continued, his eyes hardening. "That's why we never stop. That's why we won't back down. That's why we're not like the other species out here. When you live in a place where death is constantly at your heels, you learn how to survive. You learn how to fight." Zex Thor stood silently, still processing the words. The other patrons in the arena were still buzzing, their voices building into a cacophony of disbelief and curiosity. They'd witnessed something they'd never seen before, an Earthling taking down the undefeated champion of the Kron Empire. Some of them had never even considered that humanity had the potential to win a fight, let alone dominate a species as deadly and ancient as the Kron. But Marcus wasn't finished. He turned back to Zex Thor, his voice dropping to a more personal tone. "This isn't just about beating you, Zex. It's about showing everyone that they shouldn't assume anything about humanity. We're not here to be underestimated or looked down on. And I sure as hell am not here to be anyone's punching bag." There was a long, heavy silence. Zex Thor's massive frame seemed to shrink under the weight of Marcus's words. The warrior, who had been a living legend for centuries, was now faced with a realization that could very well change the way he viewed the galaxy. He had been defeated by a human, a race that had only recently taken its first steps into space. And yet it was the human, not the Kron, who had walked away from the duel with his pride intact. I see now," Zex Thor muttered, his voice still tinged with disbelief, but with a note of respect that had not been there before. "Perhaps I have been wrong. Perhaps the humans are more than just a curious species." Marcus smiled slightly, though there was no trace of malice in it. "You're just figuring that out. We've been showing the galaxy for decades now. Just no one's been paying attention." Zex Thor raised his head and looked Marcus squarely in the eye, his voice steadying. "You have earned my respect, human. I would not have thought this possible, but you have proven me wrong." The crowd had started to quiet down, the words exchanged between Marcus and Zexthor resonating deeper than the duel itself. It wasn't just about combat. It was about the recognition of humanity's strength and resilience, something that Zexthor, for the first time, truly saw. The Kron warrior wasn't the only one who had underestimated the human. The entire galaxy had, and now it was clear that their assumptions had been shattered. Marcus extended his hand, offering the simple gesture of mutual respect. "Good match. I'll give you that, Zex. You've got some serious skills. Just needs a bit of refinement, that's all." Zexthor stared at Marcus's outstretched hand for a moment, then, with slow deliberation, accepted it. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the two opponents, once poised on the edge of a brutal rivalry, now shared a moment of understanding. The human and the Kron warrior had reached a quiet truce. A truce forged in the fires of combat, where the real victory was not in the duel itself, but in the respect that had been earned. "So what now?" Marcus asked with a grin. "You want to grab a drink? You owe me one, after all." Zexthor let out a low laugh, a sound that was almost human in its warmth, though his voice still carried the weight of centuries. "I think I might enjoy that. I believe you are the first to have ever bested me, human. Perhaps it is time I learn more about this kendo you speak of." Marcus grinned, clapping the Kron warrior on the back with a friendly gesture. "Yeah, sure. But we'll need to work on your footwork. You've got potential, but you're all over the place. It'll be a fun project." The two walked off the arena floor together, leaving behind the stunned crowd and the arena's stillness. Behind them, the echoes of the duel continued to reverberate, a lesson learned not just by Zexthor, but by every sentient being in the galaxy watching. It was clear now, humans were no longer to be underestimated, a bond forged in combat. The days following Marcus's victory spread like wildfire through the galaxy. News of the duel quickly traveled across the stars, capturing the imagination of countless species. The Kron warrior, Zexthor, the undefeated first blade of his empire, had been bested by a human, someone the galaxy had written off as a primitive, technologically underdeveloped species with little to no combat experience. That narrative had been shattered. The fact that a human had stood toe-to-toe with one of the fiercest warriors in the galaxy and walked away victorious left a trail of ripples that were felt in every corner of the galaxy. But for Marcus and Zexthor, the battle was not over. No, the real work had just begun. The two unlikely allies met again soon after the duel, this time in a small, quiet cantina on the edge of a nearby station. The Cantina of the Great Forge, as it was called, was a place where warriors of all kinds gathered to relax and bond over drinks and stories. Marcus had always liked it here. It was a neutral ground, where no species was above another. It was perfect for a conversation that was long overdue. As Marcus entered, he saw Zexthor sitting in the far corner. The Kron warrior was still a sight to behold, even without his ceremonial armor, his 4 arms folded casually on the table. His once proud posture had softened, a quiet acknowledgement of what had transpired. The battle had broken him in more ways than one, and while he wasn't yet willing to admit it, Zexthor had gained a new understanding of humans. It was a hard lesson for him to learn, one that would take time to fully grasp. Marcus walked over to the table and slid into the seat across from Zexthor. The alien's crystalline eyes met his, and for a moment, neither said a word. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a recognition that something had changed between them that couldn't be easily explained. The respect Marcus had earned wasn't just from defeating Zexthor. It was from showing him a side of humanity that the Crowned Warrior had never even considered. That was a victory in and of itself. Zexthor was the first to speak. "You have done something that no one in the galaxy thought possible. You beat me in a duel. A Kron duel." His voice, while still deep and powerful, lacked the arrogance it had carried before. "I spent centuries honing my craft. Every movement, every strike, perfected. But you, human, you moved like water. Your blade wasn't an extension of your body. It was an extension of your mind. Marcus leaned back in his chair, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Well, Zex, when you've spent a lifetime on a planet where everything's trying to kill you, you learn a thing or two about survival. I didn't win because I'm the best swordsman. I won because I know how to adapt, how to read my opponent, and how to survive. That's the difference. It's not about being perfect. It's about being ready for whatever comes at you. Zex Thor's mandibles clicked thoughtfully, the expression on his face one of deep contemplation. He had fought against hundreds of warriors, alien species from across the galaxy, all of whom had their own styles, their own methods. But Marcus had done something none of them had. He had showed him a new approach, one that came not from tradition, but from innovation. And that, Zex Thor realized, was something that his people had never truly embraced. You humans are. Zex Thor paused, choosing his words carefully. You are strange. You don't fight like anyone else. Your ways, they are unpredictable, chaotic, but they work. Marcus chuckled, taking a sip of his drink. We've never been big on following rules, Zex. Our history is full of people who thought outside the box, who saw the world differently, and used that to their advantage. It's a part of who we are. Zex Thor nodded slowly. You've shown me that there is more to combat than just strength. There is strategy, but also an understanding of flexibility. You fight to win, not to prove something. His mandibles clicked once more in what could only be described as an alien sigh. I believe I have much to learn from you. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You want me to teach you? I think, Zex Thor said slowly, that your human methods would be beneficial to the Kron people. Our empire has relied on the same combat techniques for centuries. We are masters of tradition, of perfecting what we already know. But perhaps there is something to be gained from innovation. The conversation hung in the air for a moment, both men contemplating the implications of Zex Thor's words. It was a humbling admission for a warrior who had never once questioned the superiority of his people's ways. And yet, here he was, asking the human for guidance. I'm not a teacher, Zex, Marcus said, rubbing the back of his neck, but I can show you what I know. My style. Hell, it's a mix of a bunch of different things, all thrown together. What matters is the mindset. Don't fight to win. Fight to survive. That's where the real strength lies. Zex Thor looked at him for a long moment, a slow realization dawning in his eyes. I will need time, he said, the words thick with humility. But I am willing to learn. Perhaps there is more to this human audacity than I thought. Marcus grinned. I knew you'd come around. For the next several hours, the two warriors spoke of combat, of life, and of the lessons they had both learned. Marcus shared his insights into Earth's martial arts, his experiences on deathworlds, and how those teachings had shaped the way he viewed combat. Zex Thor listened intently, absorbing everything like a sponge. The Kron warrior, once so confident in his ways, was now humble, a student of humanity. As the night wore on, Marcus noticed something he hadn't expected. Zex Thor wasn't just learning for himself. He was asking questions, analyzing Marcus's techniques with the mind of a strategist. He wanted to understand more than just fighting. He wanted to understand the philosophy behind it. The two were becoming more than just duelists who had fought each other. They were becoming allies, mentors, and students of each other's cultures. But the bond between them was deeper than just a shared love of combat. It was about mutual respect. Zex Thor had learned that even in a galaxy where power was often the only currency, there was value in questioning tradition, in embracing the unknown, and in seeing strength in something as chaotic and unpredictable as humanity. As the evening came to a close, Zex Thor stood up from the table, a slight bow of his head indicating a new understanding between the two of them. Thank you, Marcus, he said. I may not yet fully understand humans, but I think I understand you. Marcus laughed and raised his glass. It's a start, Zex. It's a start. The two shared one final, knowing look before they parted ways. There was a new respect between them, one that would be felt throughout the galaxy, as both warriors continued to grow, not just in skill, but in understanding. As Marcus walked out of the cantina, his mind was already spinning with the possibilities ahead. What had started as a simple duel had transformed into something much larger. A bridge between two cultures, a shared future, and a reminder that no matter how advanced or strong a species might be, there was always room for change, growth, and understanding. And that was just the beginning.